Welcome to the channel, guys. We are back again, and today I'm going to be doing a fragrance review for Stranger Perfumerie, roasted coffee, and a whole lot of other words that I don't quite remember, so stay tuned for that. And if you like fragrance reviews, cologne comparisons, top 10 lists and first impressions, hit that subscribe button for more great content. So I've been gone a while, and it's a couple reasons. If you're curious, I did just move, as I mentioned in a previous video, to Europe, and part of the problem when I got here was that YouTube recognized that I was in a different country and actually locked me out of my own account. So it did take me a little while to sort that bit out. And also I really wanted to find something that I enjoyed to do, my first review back after a little bit of a break, and a couple fragrances which I might talk about in the future. I did try out, wasn't too enthusiastic about them. This one turned out to be the one to bring that passion to me, to the screen, to talk about this fragrance. Now, as I mentioned, with too many words, this is not just called roasted coffee. There's a huge long name, will be down below as I'm talking about it. Name is way too long in my opinion, but that doesn't detract from the fact that I do think this is actually a really, really good fragrance. Now, what do I really get from this fragrance? Now, I will actually start off by saying that when I first tried this fragrance, I really was expecting it to be something like a really strong coffee fragrance like Kerosene Follow or Acro Awake. And personally, I didn't really get that. So if you really want a coffee fragrance that not only has a strong coffee note, but is a really through and through coffee dominant fragrance, this one's probably not going to be the fragrance for you. And in fact, I find that compared to other reviews that I've seen of this and other, things that people said on Fragrantica, I don't think coffee is actually the strongest note. I do get it pretty prominently in the opening, so I do get a nice burst of coffee, but it doesn't have that richness that I would say something like Awake has, where it does smell like a really fine Colombian coffee, or Follow, where you do get this really nice roasted black coffee feeling. This does have a coffee vibe to it, but there's actually quite a bit of other things going on. And in fact, this is a popcorn note in this, which I found interesting for them to combine coffee and popcorn. I don't know who would have thought that up. But it actually, I do pick that up a little bit, and it actually gives a little bit of a nutty vibe, I feel like. And so there isn't, if I recall, any nuts in this fragrance, but it does have a bit of this nutty feeling to it, that this popcorn vibe. And sometimes I do get a straight up popcorn feel, although it's not super, super prominent. Certainly it is there. But it does have this nice, warm, sort of sensual, coffee-ish and popcorn vibe in the opening. Now that does transition pretty quickly. So that coffee note that I find very prominent right on the onset does really tone down within the first 10 minutes. And it's interesting because some people compare this to Shihan, which I disagree. I mean, I looked at the notes, and there's a lot of things in this fragrance that do certainly remind me of the notes of Shihan. And in some ways, I feel like this is maybe what Shihan was kind of going for. But with that one, I just smell a lot of hay. I don't really get much else. But as I was about to mention, with this fragrance, it does have a hay note. And as it transitions, I do start to get a lot more of that hay. And in fact, I would say that I get a lot more hay and honey within the first, after 10 minutes or so. It does have this nice sort of hay honey kind of vibe, which gives it, a little bit of a sweetness. And it does, it's interesting. Hay is kind of an interesting note that I wouldn't have really thought of, but it does have a little bit of a grassy kind of a feel to it. Now, it also starts to get very boozy, actually. So as this one transitions even further, whiskey becomes really, really strong, and there is something a little bit fruity there, a little bit sweet, that gives it this boozy, sweet, sort of honeyed hay kind of vibe, which is actually, again, also pretty nice. But where I think it really deviates, I guess, from Shihan is I get a very strong hay vibe, as I mentioned, but that's it. The whiskey, don't really get it. The coffee, don't really get it. If there's leather in that one, also don't really get it. But in this fragrance, absolutely getting those notes, feeling them, the quality's there. It's actually really, really nice. Now this one does start to dry down more. When it dries down, like I'm not getting any coffee. So still in the mid, there's a little bit of a coffee-ish vibe in my opinion. The dry down, not really, like maybe a hint in the back somewhere. But coffee also does tend to be a note that I find no matter how they list it, it's usually more of like a top note. Even if I've seen it listed in base or whatever, it seems to be something that you can smell, at least in most fragrances that I've smelled, prominently in the opening, and it tapers off pretty quick. Even if it's still there, it does die down a lot. Now, there is, I believe, also leather, and I do get a little bit of what I call this sort of sour leather feeling. And I know a couple fragrances had this. I think it was Paco Rabanne Intense was the first one I actually, 1 Million Intense, that I actually first experienced this kind of sour feeling. It does, if I recall, have a leather note in it, and it does come across a little bit like a sour leather. I definitely get that a little bit in the dry down. Now there's also patchouli, which gives it a little bit of a cocoa-y or chocolatey. It's a bit of a chocolatey patchouli, not really that hippie-ish vibe, even though I don't know how many fragrances even have that, but it's definitely not a little bit more on the skunky side, it's more on the chocolatey side. So it does give it a really nice feel with this sort of very slight coffee, little bit of a leathery, chocolatey feel, and that's definitely when the tobacco also becomes a lot more dominant. And in fact, the dry down I would say is kind of reminiscent of other fragrances, not of course one-to-one, but it does have a similar warm, sensual feel that I get from something like red tobacco, or even, I guess also by that analogy, Carlisle, or even in some ways, Creation E or Enigma. Again, doesn't smell exactly the same, but it has this sort of warm tobacco, sweet kind of a vibe. It does have a little bit of a chocolatey touch to it with that patchouli. And it does also have the addition, again, of that leather. So all in all, this is actually a really, really nice fragrance. I was very, very happy with this one. You know, it wasn't what I was expecting it to be, but it was a really, really nice experience and a nice fragrance nonetheless. Quality on this one, I would say, is pretty good. So the ingredients don't smell, you know, cheap or anything. Not that I'm an expert on individual ingredient prices, but nothing here smells overly synthetic. Like the whiskey note smells good, you know, and everything overall smells really quite nice and works together really quite nice to, you know, have one of those sort of complex fragrances that transitions a lot through the fragrance if you like that sort of thing. So really nice one, and on scent profile, definitely say it's worth a check out. Now, performance on this one is also really, really good. So the sillage is one that is actually quite strong. So when I first tried this on, you know, I was sort of just doing whatever, and I was like, oh, you know, it's probably not that strong a sillage. Went in the kitchen to make some stuff, and I was moving my hands around as I'm cutting up some vegetables and getting massive whiffs of the fragrance, reminding me after about 2 hours that yes, it's definitely still there. So this is one that has good sillage for 2-3 hours easily. Very nice projection. It is actually deceivingly strong, I think, especially if you're not moving around, if you're sitting down. You might not notice it as much, but people around you are most certainly going to notice it. Longevity is also really, really good. I would say definitely over the 8-hour mark. Now, this one did push over 10 hours for me, but to be completely fair, a lot of that time it was a skin scent. So it's going to be something that projects very nicely for 3+ hours. It's not a skin scent right away, but definitely once you get into those longer hours, tones down, takes it back, and becomes a lot more of a skin scent. Now, like I said, this is a really nice fragrance, and in fact, I would recommend this a little bit more if you want something boozy, if you like those sort of warm cocoa tobacco kind of fragrances, definitely that. But in my opinion, if you're looking for a very dominant coffee fragrance, stick with something like Follow by Kerosene or Acro Awake. Those are two you absolutely must try. This one does have a nice coffee note in it, but it's definitely not, to me, the most prominent thing, and it's not something that is the theme of the fragrance throughout the life of the fragrance. It is definitely something that adds that nice dimension to it, that nice, you know, that nice feeling to it. That nice, I like the smell of coffee. I hate coffee, but I love the smell of it. Anyways, guys, that is going to be my first review back. Definitely looking forward to doing more reviews, trying out more fragrances, sharing them all with you, and seeing, you know, what experience you guys have had. But leave a comment down below if you've had a fragrance that you expected to be something totally different, but ended up really, really enjoying and really, really loving what the fragrance actually was. Leave a comment down below, tell me what that fragrance is. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.